want to welcome everybody today to the April edition of Dairy Science Digest. We're joined today by Dr. Matt Lucy, and he's a reproductive physiologist, but he's also the chief editor for the brand new Journal of Dairy Science Communications. So we're going to gather here today to learn a little bit about he and his team's research project, and then maybe learn a little bit more about Journal of Dairy Science Communication Edition, which is slightly different than the Journal of Dairy Science that we've been highlighting over the past year. So, without further ado, the title is Reproductive Performance of Early and Late Calving Dairy Cows that are in grazing herds. And you were analyzing the effects of artificial insemination after synchronization. Could you tell us a little bit about the project? Could you set it up for us?
Yeah, sure. So, in Missouri, we have a large number of grazing dairies. They have to maintain a yearly calving interval. And for cows that calve early in the calving season, this is not a big problem. They have plenty time they have their calf, and there's plenty of time before you start breeding. And so they have high fertility when you initiate the breeding. But you always have some cows that, for whatever reason, they calve later in the calving season, perhaps within 30 days of the start of breeding. And they have lower overall fertility, and they are at risk of never getting pregnant. And so we've wanted to determine whether or not it would be appropriate to apply an estrus synchronization program to those cows. And that's what we did. That's what we tested. There was control, and there was cows that calved early in the calving season, which would be normal. And we had control, no treatment, and synchronized. And then we had cows that calved late in the calving season, and we also had control and synchronized, and we compared those groups.
Very good. And there's an excellent graphic that's available on the Journal of Dairy Science Communications front page that shows the different treatments, the 2x2 factorial, where you've got the early calving, the late calving, and then how you synchronized it up to find the difference. And of course, early calving for these seasonal based dairies is so incredibly important in order to best match that forage curve. So what did you find? What would you like folks to know about results?
Well, I think what I would say is this. The first thing you would say is that if a cow calves early in the calving season and has lots of time before you start breeding her fertility is going to be superior. Okay, that's the first thing. So you're always best if you're going to be seasonal, that you want a cow that calves early in the calving season. It has about 60 days before you start to try to breed her.
I saw that your body condition score was much higher for those early calving cows, and
less problematic usually. So you always want to have cows that calve early, but the question is, what do you do with the late calving cows? And I think what we take away is doing nothing is probably not a good strategy. For sure, on those later calving cows, if you can apply some sort of a synchronization program to them, that you can ensure that you get semen into that group of cows at the beginning of the breeding season. That's basically what we did. We designed a synchronization program that would ensure that those cows would get semen early in the breeding season. And so, yes, the fertility was overall, maybe the conception rate for that synchronization was around 30%. And you'd say, well, that's not very good. And you're right. That's not very good for a first insemination conception rate. But you have to realize if you did nothing, you would have far fewer pregnant cows, and those cows would get pregnant later in the calving season. In other words, that's 30% of these late calving cows that got pregnant on the first day of the calving season. So even though the number isn't ideal, it's a number, and it's superior to doing nothing. That's the idea.
Better than zero.
It's better than zero, and so there's, as Paul Fricke, my good friend, said, there's two rules to get pregnant cows. Rule one is put semen in the cow, right?
Right.
Right. Rule two is if she's not pregnant, refer to rule one. Okay, there's only, you got to put semen in the cows or else they do not get pregnant. And so that's basically what we're trying to do with that one, is get semen in the cows early during the calving season.
And I was looking through the synchronization protocol that you guys employed, comparing the early versus the late calving, and what we can do to really hone in on those late calving cows. And it looked like you used a series of Cedars. Can you describe? So I think a lot of the listeners are going to be very familiar with the off-sync program, but tell us about the second Cedar that went in 14 days later.
Right, and so we used Cedars twice on these cows, and like you said, the first one was a fairly standard Cedar off-sync program where they were on an off-sync, and we put a Cedar in for a week during that off-sync program. And the reason we did that was if you have a late calving cow, they're at risk for not cycling. And so if you use a Cedar off-sync program, you're more likely to get them cycling as opposed to doing nothing. So that was the concept with the Cedar off-sync program. So anytime you have sort of a funny situation with a cow, a Cedar off-sync is a good option. It's always a good option. It's very robust, and you're not going to go wrong with some sort of a Cedar off-sync program. But then the second time we put a Cedar in the cows was for what we call resynchronization, and we were really kind of constrained with what we could do on these farms. There's lots of different ways to do a resynchronization in a dairy, but on a grass-based dairy, you really need a resynchronization program that is going to get semen back into non-pregnant cows as quickly as possible. Okay, so that's the constraint. You need something, in confinement dairies, a lot of times we don't start resynchronizing open cows beginning 32 days maybe after breeding, and we might put semen back in 42 days. That's too long an interval. We needed something a little bit shorter. So the program we used was to put a Cedar in on 14 days after breeding and pull it out 21 days after breeding. And that might seem kind of odd, but if you look at the original Cedar approval, that's what it was for. In other words, they were originally approved to resynchronize cows by putting the Cedar in on 14 days after breeding and pulling out on day 21. And the effect that has is, if that Cedar is in there, the cow is not going to come back into heat. And so when you pull the Cedar out, they hopefully come back in heat all in a group, and it's easier to find them, detect estrus, and rebreed them.
If there were something that you'd want to change about the research project, what would that be?
Now, if there was one sort of failure of the study, it would be the resynchronization program. If you look at the survival plots for pregnancy, what you can clearly see is we didn't get a lot of cows pregnant at second service. Okay, we got a whole bunch of cows pregnant at first service, and we did not get a lot of cows pregnant at second service. So the reasons for that there's twofold. First of all, that's not really an ideal resynchronization program. It's not industry kind of standard. That'd be the first reason. The second reason is that when you pull that Cedar, you're breeding off heats. You're not doing a timed AI, you're breeding off heats. And anytime you breed off heats, then it brings in the heat detection and everything else. And as soon as you bring in the heat detection, you don't catch cows, and you start violating rule 2, which is if she's not pregnant, you got to go back to rule 1. Okay, and so I would say that would be the part of this program that really kind of failed. We didn't really get a good second service conception rate, at a really confined interval. And so The takeaway message is, I think, where, yeah, even if she's a late calving cows, I think we started cows, I think as early as 10 days was crazy. We didn't breed at 10 days postpartum, but we started them early. And you'll get some pregnancies with a synchronization program that you wouldn't get if you did nothing.
It's certainly not conventional, but at least you save that cow. You
Oh,
keep
yeah.
her in the herd, and you're able to recycle and use her again the following year. And kind of honing in on that first service pregnancy rate, looking at the data, it looked like you gained 23% more pregnancy rate on that first service, if I'm doing the math right. And that's huge, keeping them tight in that 6-week window.
Absolutely. Particularly for grass-based guys that are, that need to get cows pregnant. I think if she's an early calving cow, do you benefit from synchronization? You probably are, but the real benefit is, so if she's early calving and she's normal, yeah, you're going to get some benefit from synchronization, but you're going to get I think in my mind, you get a much greater benefit if you manage those late calving cows with it, because you make sure you get semen in those cows, and you get, and again, don't expect, cows 30 days postpartum and you breed her, don't expect, 50% conception rate, but 30 is better than 0, which is your other option, is do nothing,
Right.
And so I always tell people, by doing nothing, that's a decision too. Okay. Doing nothing is a decision. And so, but that's not the right decision. Doing something is usually the right decision in these things.
It will result in keeping more cows in your herd.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I guess as we kind of wrap up here a little bit, one of my absolute favorite questions that I like to ask every single researcher is, if there was one specific thing that you wanted to take home and give to the guys with boots on the ground, what would be the one message that you would send home to them?
I say the number one message is, if you want to get pregnant cows, you have to get semen in the cows. Okay. And what these types of programs give you is they ensure that at the end of the day, when you've invested all that time and effort on this cow, that you give her an opportunity to get pregnant. Okay. And that opportunity only comes from putting semen in her. Okay. That's something that we had to learn. It's so obvious today. But, when I started in my career, the idea that, you needed to breed every cow regardless of stage postpartum or whatever else was going on with that cow was quite foreign. You always waited till the cow was in perfect condition and everything was right. And then you put semen in her when she was in perfect body condition and perfect days postpartum, and then we bred her. And you know what? We shipped a lot of cows because they never got there. They never got there. Okay. And so they never got pregnant. And now we kind of realize that, yeah, you're gonna lose some ground on those cows, but if you get them pregnant, you give them another chance, and you give them a whole year to get better again and come back around. And so that's really an important message.
I really appreciate your time, Dr. Lucy, in talking with dairy producers today and helping them understand the different techniques that they can use for these seasonal grazing herds to help prevent culling cows because of reproduction, even if they're late calvers. We got to get them back in calf. And so, listeners, I applaud you also for taking time out of your day today to learn about how synchronization strategies can help make you a profit by the end of the year. I really do want you to describe a little bit about the new effort with the Journal of Dairy Science communication piece. This is the second edition, or the second month of release, or how?
So the Journal of Dairy Science, so I'll start with the Journal of Dairy Science. It is a publication with the American Dairy Science Association. And it has expanded tremendously in the last 5 years. Tremendous growth, faster than any other animal type journal, faster than any other journals in the Elsevier platform. This thing is growing. So it's kind of known as the gold standard for dairy science research. And when journals get really big, they become more and more difficult to manage. And typically what journals will do is they'll start budding off other journals that are still within the sort of the brand, but have a slightly different focus. And that was the birth of the Journal of Dairy Science Communications. And so it became quite evident that there was a lot of data out there that maybe a very focused sort of study that's asking a specific question, and it would fit in a sort of concise format. And that's what we're looking for. So we call them short communications. They're concise, they're very specific, focused questions that are of interest to the dairy science community. What's nice about JDS Communications is 100% open access, so you do not need to be a member of the Dairy Science Association or a university or anything else. You go online, you could find this paper, download it, it's yours. It's 100% open access, it's yours. As soon as we publish it, it's yours, it's for everyone. And the other thing that's nice about JDS Communications is the papers are short. Okay, so I don't know if you read too many JDS articles, they can be really long, okay? And these are limited to about 5 pages and couple of figures. And as you mentioned already, it has that graphical abstract in the front end. And if people do a good job with that, I find that that's fantastic. And what a graphical abstract is a picture and a very brief summary with key points. So you don't need to even read the whole paper. You can just, if it's a good graphical abstract, you can just get that and it'll pretty much give you an idea of what's going on, you know. So that's that effort.
Well, I really enjoy it. I've been meaning to get a hold of you to talk a little bit about this new platform because you're the editor of it, right?
Yeah, it's kind of my baby. Yeah.
Yes.
And so when I came off the Journal of Dairy Science as editor-in-chief of Journal of Dairy Science, I was just becoming, increasingly frustrated with the length of papers and just the text that was going into the typical paper in a Journal of Dairy Science. And I don't know if I'm a history buff, but I'm certainly a type of guy who likes to read old literature. And if you look at the Journal of Dairy Science in 1940, all the papers were short. They were all 4 pages long. You know, it was like somebody was asking a very simple question and there wasn't all this stuff, you know, and they just asked it. And I thought to myself, well, why not? You know, I mean, it's just like so much more pleasant to read a paper that just has one objective. You know, now there were different objectives back then. They were maybe, I don't know if easier questions, but simpler questions. We ask more complex questions now, and that's how this kind of got going, was this concept that there needs to be greater focus in the publishing. And, you know, ironically, we think of these as short communications, but if you look at the elite journals in the scientific literature, the elite ones that are global, Nature and Science and all this other stuff, they are typically about 5,000 words, which is how many words we have. So in other words, it's not that this is unusual, it's that the Journal of Dairy Science births these, huge overweight calves, okay? and they need to be like, boom, we gotta do some boom, a little bit smaller, if that makes some sense.
Well, I love the concise nature of this particular publication, and that front page graphical is singing my name, where it's got the idea of the entire project just right there. And I'm a visual learner anyway, and so it's really helpful to wrap my head around it. Well, this is Reagan Blewell with the Dairy Science Digest, a monthly podcast project designed to bring the Journal of Dairy Science straight to your ears, highlighting peer-reviewed research articles and press. This is sound science to base your management decisions around, provided by your University of Missouri Dairy team. So please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to get future editions straight to your cell phone.